We continue to read the divorce case between Mrs. Moureen Sinclair and Dr. Wesfore Sinclair. We are looking at the discussion of the case. I must also make observation that the defendant himself has failed to provide. Defendant is Dr. Sinclair, has failed to provide documentary evidence in relation to his expenses for some of the items he has listed. This is apart from his loan obligation. As it relates to the claimant's item of indebtedness, the claimant is Mrs. Sinclair. I find that, with the exception of the receipt from Elvin Sergio, dated the 20th of February 2019, indicating car loan 2013 Toyota White Prado, owned by Dr. Wesfore Leo Sinclair, disbursement loan BNS Bank by Evelyn Sergio in the sum of $2,350,000. There is no indication on the other receipts as to what these loans represent. So that this document here is specific and it indicates what it presents, but there's no indication on the other receipts as to what these loans represent. They're not specific. That's a problem. That is, there is no evidence that these relate to the reasonable needs of the claimant. Claimant is Mrs. Sinclair. Additionally, in her affidavit evidence, the loan to her from Evelyn Sergio is stated at $350,000. As it relates to medical expenses, I take account of the fact that on the claimant's own evidence, she is benefiting from medical insurance provided by the defendant. Mrs. Sinclair is benefiting from medical insurance provided by Dr. Sergio, or Dr. Sinclair, I should say, that's the defendant. That appears to cover 80% of her medical cost. Additionally, in determining an adequate sum to meet the reasonable needs of the claimant, I also take into account the following factors. This will be interesting. Let us see. Despite the fact that the claimant, Mrs. Sinclair, is not presently employed, she has some source of income. That is being a shareholder in Pines Imaging Center Limited. She admits that she is receiving dividends on her shares. That's one. Two, in light of the fact that it has now been declared that she is entitled to shares in Radiology West and an additional amount in Pines Imaging Center Limited, it is expected that her income from dividends will increase shortly. The claimant admits that she has an account in JMMB with her sister and brother as joint holders and another account with her mother. However, I do not have the benefit of the information as it relates to the sums of those accounts or portions to which the claimant is entitled. So she said she has this joint account with her relatives, but she did not present how much money is in the account and what proportion of it she's entitled to. That's another problem. You have to be specific. That's 3. 4. The claimant has been in sole occupation of the family home since the date of separation, while the defendant has been solely responsible for the mortgage and the maintenance of the children of the marriage. The defendant has admitted that when he separated from the claimant, in other words, Dr. Sinclair has admitted that when he separated from Mrs. Sinclair in 2017, he at first gave her $350,000 per month for maintenance. This was while he was taking care of the expenses of two of his children who were studying overseas. It has been revealed on the evidence that these children have completed those studies and have returned home. He is therefore at this time no longer encumbered with the educational expenses of those two children. In determining the duration of the maintenance to be provided by Dr. Sinclair, I take into account the clean break principle. The general approach is that unless there are extenuating circumstances, the order for maintenance should not be perpetual. It should be such as to enable the dependent spouse, in this case Mrs. Sinclair, to be independent. That is to provide for her own maintenance. In the case of Susan and Hugh Sam versus Quentin Chin Chung Hugh Sam, the court stated that the obligation is now cast in a mold which recognizes that few persons, if any, can support two households at the same standard. So there is no longer any right to lifelong support from a former spouse. The emphasis is now on the former spouses becoming financially independent of each other at the earliest possible time post-divorce. So there is no longer any such thing as lifetime alimony. That's what the statement is saying. Having examined the medical evidence presented by the claimant, Mrs. Sinclair, I find that she does not lack capacity for future employment. None of the doctors had said that her condition will prevent her from working. In his report dated the 15th of September 2020, Dr. Abel stated that the claimant first presented to him in November 2018. He made reference to major depression on the part of the claimant, which he states is a treatable condition. He also makes reference to physical, emotional, verbal, and financial abuses which were not mentioned in the evidence of the claimant. He says that these impacted negatively on her ability to function and that she may need extended period of psychotherapy to deal with the trauma and abuse she reported in her marriage. I will refrain from making any decision on the veracity of the report as it relates to the occurrence of these abuses. However, I am of the view that the fact that they were not mentioned in our evidence, even up to the time of trial, the situation is of such that the claimant may no longer need the extended period of psychotherapy. So Mrs. Sinclair told her doctors that she was being abused, but she did not tell the judge, the court, in her divorce case. Let's continue. Dr. Stacy Davis states that the claimant, Mrs. Sinclair, suffers from autoimmune disease, degenerative lumbar spine, and osteoporosis of the feet and right shoulder, which will cause varying degrees of disability. She says that the claimant will require chronic therapy as well as follow-up visits. In relation to the cataract to the eyes, Dr. Maynard McIntosh states that post-operatively she will need approximately 2 weeks out of office to facilitate a recovery process. Dr. Ashini Mansingh or Mansingh says that the claimant was they should be diagnosed with condition of the right grade 2 which requires surgery and will require 2 weeks out of office to help with recuperation. Consequently, there is clear evidence that both parties are suffering from medical conditions which may limit their full potential to work, but does not prevent them from engaging in work. On her own evidence, Mrs. Sinclair suggests that her limitations relate to jobs that require strenuous activity or long hours. However, there is no evidence that the job for which she is qualified requires strenuous activity. As it relates to the limitation regarding long hours, I take into consideration the fact that the approach to employment has now evolved globally, where persons do not always have to go into a physical office space to work, but jobs to include those for which Mrs. Sinclair is qualified and can now be performed from a virtual office. Remember, she's an accountant, qualified to work as an accountant and an auditor. In my determination of the issue, I also take into account the fact that the claimant, Mrs. Sinclair, was able to advance herself academically during the marriage from the sole support of Mr. Sinclair. Her evidence is that at the commencement of the marriage, she was a senior auditor. Nonetheless, during the marriage, she was able to acquire 2 degrees, accounting and management studies, and accounting, respectively. Additionally, I find the claimant's effort to find a job. Since the separation have not been consistent and sustained. The evidence that she has presented indicates that within a period of 2 years, she made only 5 applications. In relation to the application to JetBlue, in light of their response to her, she applied for a position for which she was not qualified. To my mind, she was quite serious about finding a job. In my mind, if she was quite serious about finding a job, she would have been sending at least 5 applications per month instead of 5 applications within a 2-year period, in a period of 2 years. Therefore, I am not convinced after hearing her evidence that she has made a genuine effort to retain and obtain work suitable for her intelligence and experience. Moreover, it is also my view that the claimant's skill sets as an accountant affords her the capability of being self-employed. That is, she has the option of setting up her own accounting practice. So you see here, the judge is examining Mrs. Sinclair's statement that she cannot work and must be maintained by Dr. Sinclair, who she's divorcing. But as you can see, the judge is finding and looking at and actually finding that her statement that she cannot work is not genuine. She can work, right? Furthermore, I take into consideration the fact that the claimant is 8 years junior to her husband, referable to the retirement age in the public service. She has 10 years of working life, while he has only 2. In light of the defendant's medical condition, that is the diagnosis of vertigo, I take into consideration the fact that 2 of the children of the marriage are currently pursuing tertiary education for whom he has been providing the entire financial support. I also consider the fact that he has other young children, not of the marriage, for whom he has to make provision. This provision cannot be limited to their day-to-day maintenance, but the fact that he is 63, it is expected that he must make provision for their future in the event that, due to effect of aging and his medical diagnosis, he is no longer able to work. It is my view that in light of the fact that the claimant, that's Mrs. Sinclair, for almost the entirety of the marriage has not worked, she should be given reasonable time to put herself in a position to maintain herself. In the case of Margaret Gardner versus Rivington Gardner, Edwards A.G., as she then was, found that 3 years is a reasonable time. In this instant case, I will adopt the same approach. So, as you see from that case, and this may apply to other cases, including your divorce case, if that's what you are experiencing now, that a spouse who is not working will be given 3 years of maintenance to get themselves together to start working. 3 years, that's it. Okay, we continue. Therefore, having assessed the reasonable needs of the claimant, her capacity to provide for herself in the near future, the defendant's capacity and obligations, I find that in all the circumstances, the claimant should be paid maintenance in the sum of $350,000 per month for over a period of 3 years. It is also my view that the defendant should continue to cover the cost of the insurance premium that offers the claimant a coverage of 80% cost of medical bills for the next 3 years.